2, 3. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Hey!
This is
from WBRN Radio, the episode, the Monday morning quarterback on the 2020 Boston Red and the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. We started out here with Harry Carey, take you out to the ball game. Well, there's no ball game to be attended, and there probably will not be for the near future. The Major League Baseball, the NHL, NBA, World Football, they're all on holiday. Period. Today is the 10th anniversary of the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare. It was passed 10 years ago. If you recall, President Obama took office in 2009, and roughly a year later there, the Affordable Care Act was passed. Millions of people were able to sign up for the Affordable Care Act or under it. We did also sign up for it, moving from the mass plan on. And now, let me explain. Now, in some states, it was a little bit different. In the Commonwealth, we had mass care and still do under Willard Romney, period, which was a model for the Affordable Care Act. Many states use the federal exchange and still do till today. There is a speculation that the Trump administration will reopen the period for enrollment in the Affordable Care Act, which is based upon, by and large, the Medicaid part of it there. Medicare, the enrollment has finally ended for Medicare. But Medicaid, various insurance companies that are under the Affordable Care Act are there. So thus people signed up for it, and with people, of course, over 65 are covered by Medicare, the basic plan, and then there's supplementals at Plan D, etc. But this was historic. Now we are still grappling with some of the same issues, but COVID-19 has put the spotlight, a double spotlight, on the American healthcare system, which is inadequate. One of the basic problems with the American healthcare system is that it is a private system by and large, with the exception of certain programs. Medicare under President Johnson was enacted in the 60s. And thus, at that time, the conservatives called it socialized. Well, it brought fantastic growth to what healthcare is today. It has included some things, however, there are major shortcomings. Prescription drugs, hearing aids, and the ability of the government, or inability of the government, to buy drugs and medications in bulk, as the VA system is able to do, would save millions and billions of dollars. But we're still stuck out there, and for progressives that have advocated a single payer system, Medicare for all, Bernie Sanders is the solution to go, no doubt about that. And some of the cynic types say, well, Italy has a single payer system. That is correct, but it also has a lot of old people, and although it has a single payer system, has excellent health care had in the north where the virus broke out, but it got out of control there, and now they are playing a catch-up. Of course, in the southern part of Italy, not as good. Then you go on to Spain. Spain has its own breakout now I think is in number 3. Of course, now it's also come to the UK. It's moved all over the EU. And now the centerpiece in the States is in New York. It started out in Washington State, in Kirtland, Washington to be precise. And there it was in a retirement home, or extended living home, rehab place, etc. And they were elderly people there. Some were contacted, others died, and some are still surviving in the home. And it spread throughout Washington State, which was called the epicenter. And now that distinction has moved on to New York, the city. And then we go back to places like Oregon. There are restrictions there. We have now a new word out called social distancing. Basically 2 meters or 6 feet apart. They recommend. And in a few states, more every day, people are asked to remain in their dwellings if they have one. And the outdoor circulation is limited to food stores, pharmacies, and other essential businesses that one must go to. You also have to realize there are some people out there still working during the pandemic in the U.S. So public transport is out there and it is running. They've labeled some people essential workers, and essential workers are doing the essential work. Now, I think the figure is about 40%, if I look at my notes here, of the people are doing their work from home. So an enormous amount of home people that are there and are able to do their work from home, which is interesting. On the legislative scene, the Senate had a vote on Sunday. It was what they call a procedural vote. But old McConnell was down 5 Republicans to Willard Romney, Lee, and also Rand Paul out of Kentucky. Those are 3 I can think of that have been infected or were close vicinity of people infected. That group includes Senator Lee of Utah and also Senator Romney of Utah. So they were not there, so the vote was, I believe, 47-47. And now McConnell says he's going to try to force it. That in itself would be a mistake, because part of the problem there is that now the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, says that she's thinking of putting together her own bill. This is a situation where the Democrats have a hand. Anything that McConnell and his henchmen dream up in the Senate has to pass the House of Representatives. And then it goes to D.J. Trump. Now, D.J. Trump is not going to veto a bill sent up there this important. He can't afford to do it because of the political consequences. Now, the argument is over the same old cookie-cutter basic of who gets what. The airline industry is one that would like to get interest-free loans, but they don't want to put up collateral. Now, the issue there is you have 5 major airlines, won't get into the minor ones, in the U.S., and they claim that they would go out of business. But yet, when they received the $1 trillion tax cut, they bought their stock buybacks to boost the price, and that created the artificiality within the market. On a numbers man on the same network, the Boston Red Network, we'll talk about that. We'll go through the Beige book and we'll look at certain other things like modern economics, and which basic concept is we can run up deficits and deal with them later, which is what the administration has been doing since the tax cuts. And we'll highlight the problems that caused the economy. And then, of course, the Fed started cutting interest rates down to 25 basis points. That was prior to the latest hiccup, we'll call it. But in actuality, the economy was in a recession. People quibble over it was a mild recession or whatever recession, but it was in a recession, downturn. And now with the pandemic, people now admit there, and they talk amongst economists, various people in business that this is a recession that is getting more severe by the day and could be a depression at any time. There's no doubt about that. We're looking at our models, won't go into it much, but it is a situation. So the federal government faces two challenges: the economic challenge, which is a global challenge. Let me just look at a little bit of what was going on today in India. The Indian market, Bombay, is still called Bombay. It was down, 10.3%. In New Zealand, they were down 10%. So this is looking at where it was. Now, in 1929, that was called the Great Depression. The market went down 90%. But you have to realize it's a much smaller market in 1929 than today. And it was not basically an internationalized global market. Now, this market is down 30+%, which is not bad. During the dot-com boom, I believe, I'd have to check my notes, it was down about 59%. So it has a way to go, but is driven by a pandemic. You did not have a pandemic in 1929. That was in 1918. Nor did you have one in the dot-com boom or the last depression of 2008, 2009. There was a different situation, and when we leave, we will hear from Barack Obama. He was speaking in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 2010. There were elections that day, midterm elections, and the Republicans were able to take back the House in 2011. But prior to that, their stratagem was, and this is where we're quarterbacking, was to just simply obstruct. They had set in motion a propaganda program that was propagated and promoted by conspiracy theorists known as the birthers around President Obama's birth certificate, delegitimize his presidency. And at the same time, the same character, old man McConnell, he was at the time a minority leader and not a majority leader, and he was able to obstruct. I hope he was minority leader at the time. Yeah, and anyway, and he was able to obstruct. Now that has been a constant tool in the toolkit of these reactionaries. Use negative propaganda, and that was the birth certificate of President Obama, and that was what Fox and Company and the right-wing media were putting out there. And they were able to rally people using something at the time called the Tea Party. You won't hear about that anymore. But we had the taught people, that was something to address with the banks. The mistakes made, the banks incidentally had to be addressed. G.W. Bush was correct about that. But the problem was with near $1 trillion, $850 million, $1 billion correction package that was given to corporations that saved Chrysler and so forth and so on. Those people paid it back. But the lifeline was extended out there, and that saved American capitalism, because within a few days or a few weeks, it would have all been gone. Period. So that credit owns to President Obama. And then we had quantitative easing, which was constantly criticized by McConnell and his various henchmen, henchwomen. And that was part also what the conspiracy theorists were talking about on their channel, and they were promoted up. Why were they promoted up? Because it was the interest of capitalism. They were duped, bamboozled, and thus that put the Republicans out there. And when the Republicans took over the House of Representatives at that time, they were talking about reforming Social Security to put it in line with more or less a 501k. In other words, you'd have a list of stocks you could choose, and that would be your Social Security fund. That was modeled after Milton Friedman's pipe dream in Chile, and that was under the dictatorship there of the famous General Pinochet. So Pinochet ushered that in. This was when capitalism was running willy-nilly. Now, we did not have We had dictators at that time running around, but this so-called new populism was not there at the time. So capitalism went on, and when the economy started to recover, then we had a situation that in 2016, President Obama was, 2012, excuse me, President Obama was running for re-election 2 years later, and he was re-elected. He ran against Willard Romney, now the senator from Utah. And the Republicans out at the airport, their jets were coming in. They were confident that the Republicans would win, literally. Very confident, in fact, that would happen. Willard Romney's headquarters down in in East Boston, they were breezing away at that, and they were so confident that they would win, and it did not happen. Barack Obama was re-elected president, and although his polling numbers were in the middle 40s most of the time, and that was due to the conspiracy theorists. They are the ones to blame for this entire action because they were promoted up. And now this could not have happened without the corporate media, without places like Facebook, and to a lesser extent Twitter and YouTube, etc., putting out these ridiculous videos. At the start of the climate change deniers, they were in there, the anti-vaccination people. All these characters were able to organize via the internet, the mouth-to-mouth organization, etc., because the mobile or smartphones were just coming in. But in states like Michigan, they were able to facilitate the election of Gateway Snyder, who used to be at a third-rate computer company, as a governor. And with Republicans in their legislative system, they turned Walter Reuther's Michigan into a right-to-work state. Now, with all these things occurring, this is why the American nation, all 50 states, is where it is today. A dodgy healthcare system is dodgier every day. And looking at my notes, just-in-time inventory, very important there. These hospitals, whether they are profit or non-profits, didn't really matter. The inventory, say if you had 1,000 surgical masks, gowns, etc., and you'd get down to so many, we'll say 100, then you would get a new order in. A new order would come automatically. But the problem was they did not have a supply. And in the old days, we did not have just-in-time. So thus, a manufacturer would make more than would be, and they would be stored in the warehouse, and various customers would order more than they needed. I remember the example at a work site once. Fellow said, well, we have these people here. He had these men at the time standing around, and said, well, these characters are standing around. He said, yeah, but I don't pay them very much. I want them here when I see them. When I need them, excuse me. So this is a different type of metric that you had in those days from what you have now. And the new business models, business analytics, is simply not working, and this is what this crisis has proved. If you hear the daily briefings from old DJ Trump and his cohort Pence, they're out there trying to give a scientific update when they do not believe in science. But this is a direct contradiction, because when you hear the word COVID-19, that word is a substitute for science, and science is science. So if you want to believe that science is not a valid discipline, well, it's not in your little mind. Our advice to you is, if you have the symptoms of COVID-19, isolate yourself and stay there. You'll either recover or go to Boot Hill, as LBJ would say, which will all work out about the same. But the fact is, today in New York and Los Angeles, various other places, medical systems there are being overwhelmed. And they're having to open up medical facilities. St. Vincent's out in Los Angeles, and another one there, St. Vincent's, because of structural damage, but they're going to reopen it and move patients from facilities now that are not COVID-19 patients, and they can recuperate there. And then you have the ship, was it Comfort and Mercy, one of those, off the coast there. They're going to use it to offload some of the people, because they have people now that should be in intensive care units or in the halls of these medical centers. I recall the last time I was at medical center, I was in the ER part there, hooked up, as one would say, getting some fluids. Anyway, a blood thinner for a procedure. It's called an angioplastic procedure. Anyway, whatever. And we were stuck there a few years back, where they actually had people in the hallways. Not as bad. Now they build on new additions. But to run a medical center, whether it be for profit or not, under normal business matrix, is suicidal. Because you will have pandemics. You will have flus that people get sick. And as the population gets to be older, which it is now, you're going to have more people going into hospital kinds of things that they're in for a day or so, and they're out. Like my friend Amy, of course, she was in for a knee operation. She's out. She was able to escape before COVID-19 came out, and so she's now recuperating. But she cannot have the rehabilitation because that facility is closed. So in other words, this puts a lot of stress on what the medical system would normally hear. And another thing is, it is the Production Act, Defense Production Act, that DJ Trump has not enacted. He's using voluntary compliance, and he cites Honeywell and some of the others are going to make some mess. But the problem there is, and he tries to compare the Defense Production Act, which was used under Roosevelt, and others. Actually, Roosevelt used a different act. This is a later act that came in. Anyway, I had the date of it here, but we don't have it right now. Or we didn't write it down, probably being a bit dodgy on our part. But nonetheless, he compared it to what happened in Venezuela. Of course, again, places were nationalized there. In the UK, they call it put under authorization. It doesn't really matter. In the national interest, things are industries do become nationalized, and that should have happened here. 3Ms of the world, Honeywells of the world. Once that was put under nationalization, and then he should have put them on the O.T. Leo's free strikes, tell the CEOs there, get the production lines rolling. And if they didn't do it, the powers to be, the U.S. military, would show up at their factories, and they would open up the gate, and the various functionaries would be ordered in, and they would set those production lines up and review their safety practices, of course, as much as possible. But just like food stores, where where people are not standing 2 meters away most of the time, but fortunately for me, it was late enough in the evening where there were not probably over 35 or 40 people in the whole store, and they were, for the most part, pretty well distanced away, and the checkout counters were not there. But they recommend I was listening at a BBC program that obviously hand washing is there, sanitizing is there, and if you go out, try to sanitize the handle of the car, to just wear gloves. A few people were doing that. I noticed a young lady wearing gloves, didn't the last time around, but anyway, wearing gloves and mask if you have one to wear, and at the same time, when you get home, make sure you sanitize whatever utensils you use to get the food in. The fruit, you wash the fruit, which normally people do, and that's basically about it. And then wash your clothes. And they recommend to people, I was telling Carla that the other day, that And when you can find some, she found some markets that were evidently out of some things. But if you appear there, we suggest that you, if you can, pick up about 3 weeks of the basics. I did notice that this one market there was ample supply of toilet paper there. People were rebuying it. What had happened, some people had bought so much of it, they now have a 2-month supply. And that is normal. If you have a 2-month supply at home or a month supply at home, you can pick up a packet, and they had the packets. They even had Clorox, so you can pick that up. And those are some kinds of things that you can keep around. They did not, however, have any isopropyl alcohol around, and the lady, they get it occasionally. Of course, it evaporates like alcohol, literally, the minute they got it. You have some peroxide. They are getting off here, but a few of the necessary tips. So evidently what is happening this week, we'll have another session today, and a big question in the Senate. How many senators will be there if they start to drop like flies? Well, they'll have to work all that out. And in the House, they've been discussing remote voting. They haven't got it yet in there, but they've sort of figured out, well, use social distancing of 1 or 2 senators going at a time. And if they want to make these floor address, they can make them. What they should do is just have the House Technical Services for floor address. They could make those anytime they wanted. They could use props and incorporate that into the record. And the actual voting doesn't take that long. They can take care of that. And if Nancy Pelosi gets her own bill up there, let me get to the arguments that people set forth. Now, this is one of the problems with the so-called gig economy that's turned to the gig. The gig economy that's turned to the gig. I made the same mistake on Friday Job. Anyway, nonetheless, you have these workers out there, and I think Uber, I did write that down, 70-80%, and probably depends on cities, of Uber drivers are idle. And those drivers do not have the kinds of protection that you would want them to have. So again, that is a problem. What do you do about Uber drivers there? Well, you incorporate them. One simple answer is into the unemployment regiment, and that is what is being discussed. In addition to the 1 or 2 checks that will be sent out, is what to do about people that are not eligible, the so-called self-employed. What to do about them. The Democratic leadership will want to address that, at least a partial address there. And now the package has exceeded $1 trillion. There was a rumor out there it could be up to $2 trillion. But from our modeling at Krantz Analytics, this is going to have to be several installments. We're not finished with this one. They will go on. And this is just to stabilize the economy. This is not to deal with the aftermath. Various people, predictions we'll talk about on Numbers Man, basically very little growth will occur in Q1. Q2 we'll start to see that. And in the whole year, growth in many places are lucky to hit 1% or less. We'll talk more about that as the modeling comes out. I was listening to a very interesting program here, a little bit about modeling probabilities, which we deal with. There was, let's see, what was her name here? I'll get her in a minute here. Margaret Heffler. She wrote a very famous book, The Fetish of, I believe, of Forecasting. Hopefully I didn't get it wrong. Fetish of, and the whole idea of uncertainty. Well, one of the problems in modeling or anything of that nature, if the model says, and they've looked at some models that say, well, the U.S. could have 1.5 million people dead in this particular situation. Well, that's possible out of a nation of over 300 million. But if we look at what happened in China, and one case was the Diamond Princess. That was a ship stuck out in the sea, quite literally. They had over 3,000 people on there, and roughly they had about a 20%, well, let's see, it was a 20% infection rate there. About that. They roughly had 300 and whatever infected. And out of that, as far as deaths, they had 8 deaths there. So relatively low. It's a 2% death rate there. But you still, one of the things was, now these where they had elderly people on there, no doubt about that. A lot of elderly people. They were cabin to cabin. They could open their hatch and get in some fresh air. I think that was probably one of the keys to their survival. And also, many of these people, no doubt, had health coverage because they could afford the cruise, and their medical issues had been pretty much updated, although they had medical issues. So they were in better shape than, say, someone in the Tombs, Rikers Island in New York, that had virtually no health care when they arrived at the jail, and they have very shoddy health care today. So that's one of the reasons that they're now trying to figure out, well, what to do with people that had pre-existing conditions, like old Harvey Weinstein. Do they move him someplace else, and these various other people? No doubt that will happen, because, again, that's close proximities, and people there have caught the COVID-19 virus. And they don't want a situation where you have hundreds of people with the virus in the jails, for the simple reason you have staff there, guards, etc., and those people could be taking it home to their families. And then you have a big, big problem, a deep, deep hole. So the system, the correction system in New York had been overcrowded. Medical conditions have been dodgy, bad, for a number of years. This just did not start today, but it has to be remedied. And one of the things that Congress has to look at is the overall, not only Medicare for all, but the status of the medical centers in the U.S. and the status of medical workers. More medical workers have to be educated. With an older population, you need more primary doctors. Everyone cannot be a specialist. As in Cuba. Incidentally, speaking of Cuba, the Cubans have sent special units to Italy of 50 or more specialists. These are nurses, doctors that know how to deal with epidemics. Also, the Russian Federation has sent medical supplies there and medical personnel there also. Those are two of the nations, and also China. China wants to become the authority for medical care. They make masks, they make a lot of things, and they're back popping out those masks like hotcakes on Boylston Street, so to speak. So again, the whole paradigm is changing. They are sending specialists there, and in our opinion, DJ Trump should ask the Chinese to send specialists here, because they know what they're doing. They know the business. Here, the business is dodgy. They're flying by the seat of their pants, period. And they don't have the equipment. Now, this over-reliance on private industry is different. In other places, what's happened is they've used the university labs, and they have been able to make their own tests, which are very good tests. And there was a small town in Italy where they did make the tests. They tested everyone in this little 2,000-person village, and they separated out the people there, and they were able to control the situation. Now, that was in the north of Italy. So it can be done. There are improvements in Korea, the Korean Republic there, and in the Democratic Republic, evidently, according to news reports of American media, they have accepted some specialists that DJ Trump promised to send to them. But they would be very wise to accept, and I believe the Chinese have already sent this. Iran, another hotbed there. Iran's problem is that there are certain types of medical supplies they cannot get because of the sanctions. And even on the humanitarian parts, a lot of these companies will not send supplies there because they will come under the evil hand of DJ Trump. So other countries are there. China is there. And what happens, this is a knowledge work. I don't want to get too much off on this. Incidentally, we will have an open source report, and we'll talk about various open source projects, including ventilators and other kinds of things. Open source research that people can do, and it's turning out there. Just found a site here. I said that is spelled XSE, xsed.org. Hopefully that's right. We'll try to put it up here. Anyway, that is one of the sites there that has a lot of useful information. The WHO site has a lot of information also. So we'll end the broadcast here. You can find us on iHeart, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Stitcher, on Google Podcasts, and various other places there. And it doesn't matter where you are in the world. If you go to Spreaker, particularly Spain and Italy, they are there in those countries. And you can find us in New Zealand, in the UK, and we do have people, we've looked at statistics, coming from those places and also from China. And as we move along here, we still owe you the week with was, and we'll get it to you, and we'll hear from Uncle Carl and some other people. We'll get this out here. As we move along here, our production is a little bit less than what we would want to do, but nonetheless, we'll get it done. Many of these casts are not time-sensitive, period. Let's see what we've had. These totals keep going up here. Over 300,000 people infected in this situation with the pandemic. Somewhere here we have it. Over 300,000 there, and what is it? 6,000 plus that have died out there. So again, looking at different countries, Italy, of course, having a lot of older people there, that has made it a bit higher than some places. Now it comes to the UK with Johnson and his Tory government cutting back on the national healthcare system. It's very important to look at where the healthcare system is in the country. In 2019, we'll look at that. And where it is today, that it is in fact overloaded. But one of the things about pandemics, etc., they do eventually run their course. There's no doubt about that. So again, this is one of the things that we'll see in New York. It's just coming. The same thing in California. Those are some of the target spots now. But the problem is days lost. DJ Trump and his administration have lost valuable time, and to catch that up, they've just created more pain, suffering, inconvenience there. And where we are right now is basically most places have people isolated or in place, so to speak, until the end of this month, and it'll be into April. There's no doubt about that. These 14-day things will be extended. How far it goes into April and perhaps into May, we don't know. A lot of this will depend on how they quote-unquote flatten out the curve. Now, that doesn't address the economic problems that are out there. That just says flattening out the curve. But that has jumped in New Orleans now. It hasn't gotten there. But where they have these dodgy healthcare systems like they have in Louisiana, they have shuttered Bourbon Street and those places, so people don't have places to go. Florida is another one to look at. They have a lot of old people in Florida. They had a lot of young people on the beaches. They probably closed most of the beaches now, but they were late in Alabama. And one of the things you'll see more and more in these studies that are run real time, places that have not expanded their Medicaid are in deep trouble, and have historically had very bad healthcare delivery systems. I remember when they had a great debate then, that was a race that Hopalong Cassidy was in there, the current senator from, one of the senators from Louisiana, and that has caused a problem ever since. And this character used to literally be at the so-called Main Hospital, which is one time called Charity Hospital in New Orleans. And this is a legacy of bad health care. They've had bad health care there since the demise of Huey P. Long. It's been that bad in Louisiana. So what is happening is these people are going to have to step up to the plate. The legislative struggle will continue. The race there's some in April contests coming up. Many of them have been moved to June. We'll get some of Bernie Sanders' message out there as he's been putting his out there. And we'll see you soon. This is Boston Red and Jerry Pippin broadcast booth on the 22nd of March. And we're now officially in the spring season 2020. Good day.
Thank you. Hey, look, Joe, this is a good-looking crowd, man. This is a beautiful crowd on a beautiful day. It's good to be back here in Pennsylvania.
And they're all the way back in the parking lot. You can't even see you.
It is good to be back in Pennsylvania. Good to be back in Philly. I know part of the reason you're fired up is because you've just heard from one of the finest vice presidents we will ever see in this country's history, Joe Biden. Plus, Joe looks cool in those glasses too, doesn't he? You know, I want you to know, when I was still campaigning, right after I selected, I've got to make sure you stay fired up. I promise you'll be out here to catch the Phillies and the Eagles. I don't want to get between Philly fans and their sports teams. Now, Philadelphia, 2 years ago, you defied the conventional wisdom in Washington. They said, no, you can't. They said, no, you can't overcome the cynicism of politics. No, you can't overcome the special interests and the big money. No, you can't take on the big challenges of our time. No, you can't elect a skinny guy with a funny name to the presidency of the United States. What did you say? That's what you said. But, Philip, I've got this message for you today. I want everybody to understand our victory in that campaign, that wasn't the end of the road. That was just the beginning of the road. That was just the start of the journey. By itself, it does not deliver the change that we need. I know a lot of you thought just because of election night and the inauguration, everybody was having fun and Beyonce was singing and Bono, and so everybody thought, boy, this is it. But that was just the start, because we understood what we were going up against. The only thing that the election did was it gave us the chance to make change happen. It made each of you a shareholder in the mission of rebuilding our country and reclaiming our future. And Philly, I'm back here 2 years later because our job is not yet done and the success of our mission is at stake right now. On November 2nd, I need you as fired up as you were in 2008. Because we've got a lot of work ahead of us. You know, after that last election, it was my hope that we could pull together Democrats and Republicans to confront the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. I hoped that we could get beyond the divisions of red states and blue states. That's what we thought. Because although we are proud to be Democrats, we are prouder to be Americans. And I know there are plenty of Republicans out there in this country who feel the exact same way. But when we arrived in Washington, the Republicans in Congress, they had a different idea. They knew it would take more than 2 years to climb out of this recession. They knew that by the time of this election, people would still be out of work. They knew people would still be frustrated. And so what they figured was, if we just sat on the sidelines, if Republicans just opposed everything we said we could do, if they rejected every compromise we offered, if they spent all their time attacking Democrats, instead of attacking problems, they figured they might be able to do well in the polls. So they spent the last 20 months saying no. Even the policies that they had supported in the past. They said no to middle-class tax cuts. They said no to help for small businesses. They said no to a bipartisan deficit reduction commission that they had once co-sponsored. If I said the sky was blue, they said no. If I said there were fish in the sea, they said no. They figured if Obama fails, then we win. Am I wrong, Joe? That's exactly what they said. Now, they may have thought that playing political games would help them win an election, but I knew it wouldn't get America through the crisis. So I made some different decisions. I took whatever steps were necessary to stop the economic freefall, to stop a second depression, even if those decisions were not popular, even if they were not easy, because you didn't elect me to do what was easy, you elected me to do what was right. That's why you sent me to Washington. You didn't send me to Washington to put my finger to the wind and figure out which way the wind was blowing, to spend all my time reading the polls. You sent me there to solve problems. And 20 months later, we no longer face the possibility of a second depression. Our economy is growing again. The private sector created jobs 9 months in a row now. There are 3 million Americans who would not be working today if not for the economic plan that Joe and I put into place. That's the truth. Now, what's also the truth is we still got a long way to go. The hole we're climbing out is so deep. The Republicans messed up so bad, left such a big mess, that there are still millions of Americans without work. I want everybody to understand this, just in case there's still some undecideds out there. Before I was inaugurated, and before Joe was inaugurated, we had lost 4 million jobs in the 6 months before that. We lost almost 800,000 jobs the month I was sworn in. 600,000 the month after that, 600,000 the month after that. Before any of our economic plans were put into place, we had lost almost 8 million jobs because of their policies. And that means that it's going to take us a while to get out of this hole. There are still millions of Americans who can barely pay their bills. Millions of Americans who are just barely hanging on. Millions of middle-class families who were struggling even before this crisis hit and are out there treading water. I know. So, of course, people are frustrated. Of course, people are impatient with the pace of change. And believe me, so am I. But here's the thing I need everybody to remember. No matter how angry you get, no matter how frustrated you are, the other side has decided to ride that frustration and anger without offering any solutions. And you know, a lot of folks in Washington think that they're running a smart strategy. They're saying the other party's supporters are more enthusiastic, more excited. They say all y'all are going to stay home. You might not come out like you did in 2008. They say you might not care as much. They think, oh, well, Obama's name's not on the ballot. Maybe they're not going to turn out. And they think you're going to be willing to let the same politicians and the same policies that left our economy in a shambles back to Washington. Well, Philadelphia, I think the pundits are wrong. I think the pundits are wrong. I think we're going to win, but you got to prove them wrong. It's up to you to show the pundits that you care too much about this country to let it fall backwards. That you're going to keep us moving forward. That you're ready to fight for the future. Just look, everybody, I need you to understand, this election is a choice. And the choice could not be clear. It's not as if the Republicans are offering new ideas. It's not as if the Republican leaders have changed their agenda since the last time they ran Washington. In fact, the chairman of one of their campaign committees promised that if the Republicans take control of Congress, they will follow the exact same agenda they pursued the last time they were in power. We know what that agenda was. We know what this agenda was. You cut taxes, mostly for millionaires and billionaires. You cut regulations for special interests. You try to bust the unions. You cut back on investments in education and clean energy and research and technology. The basic idea is if we put our blind faith in the market and we let corporations do whatever they want and we leave everybody else to fend for themselves, then America's somehow automatically going to grow and prosper. Well, let me tell you something. The problem with their theory is it didn't work. We tried it for 8 years. It didn't work for middle-class families who saw their incomes fall and their costs go up when Republicans were in charge. I want everybody to understand, between 2001 and 2009, the wages of middle-class families went down 5%. They didn't go up, they went down. Job growth was the slowest that it had been at any time since World War II. Slower than it's been over the last year. When they were in charge, they took a record surplus from Bill Clinton, and by the time I got there, we had a record deficit. And because of that free-for-all that they had on Wall Street, we're still digging our way out of the crisis. That's their track record. Now, listen, everybody, I don't bring this up because I want to relitigate the past. I bring it up because I don't want to relive the past. I don't want to go through what we already gone through. I bring it up because this philosophy that the other side intends to bring if they win in November. Republicans might have a new name for it. They call it the Pledge to America, but it's the same old stuff they've been peddling for years. Let's take a look at the Pledge to America. Anybody read the Pledge to America? Let me tell you, for starters, it turns out that the pledge was actually written in part by a former lobbyist for AIG and ExxonMobil. That should tell you something right there. You can't make that stuff up. And the centerpiece of the pledge is a $700 billion tax cut that would only go to the top 2%, the wealthiest 2% of Americans. 98% of you would not get this tax cut, but they would borrow $700 billion from the Chinese or from the Saudis or somebody. That's their big idea to get the economy moving again. These are the same folks who lecture us on fiscal responsibility. But now they want to borrow $700 billion to give a tax cut worth an average of $100,000 to millionaires and billionaires. When you ask them, where are you going to get the money? They say, well, we don't have it. But mostly they're going to borrow it from other countries. And just to pay for a small part of it, they want to cut education by 20%. They would reduce financial aid for 8 million college students. Now, Philadelphia, at a time when the education of our country's citizens is one of the most important things for economic success. The notion that we would give out tax cuts to folks who don't need them and sacrifice the next generation, that does not make any sense at all. I want to ask my Republican friends, do you think China's cutting back on education? Do you think South Korea or Germany or India are cutting back on education? Those countries aren't playing for second place, they're playing for first place. Guess what? America does not play for second place either. We play for first place. So Philly, as long as I'm president, we're not going to let Washington politicians sacrifice your education for a tax cut we can't afford. And that is a choice in this election. Joe and I, we've got a different idea. about what the next 2 years should look like. And it's an idea rooted in our belief about how this country was built. We know government doesn't have all the answers to all our problems. We know the private sector is primarily responsible for creating jobs and prosperity. I believe government should be lean and efficient, and I don't want anybody in Washington wasting your taxpayer dollars. That's why I proposed a 3-year spending freeze, set up a bipartisan fiscal commission to deal with our deficit. But in the words of our first Republican president, named Abraham Lincoln, we also believe that government should do what people can't do better by themselves. We believe in a country that rewards hard work and responsibility. We believe in a country where we look after one another. We believe in a country where working people can come together so they can get a minimum wage and better working conditions. We believe that I am my brother's keeper. I am my sister's keeper. That everybody deserves a fair shot at the American dream. That's the America I know. That's the choice in this election. We want to make permanent. We want to make permanent tax cuts for the middle class because you deserve a break. Instead of the other side's plan to keep giving tax breaks to companies that are shipping jobs overseas, I want to give those tax breaks to companies that are investing right here in the United States of America. I want to give it to small businesses and to American manufacturers and to clean energy companies. I don't want solar panels and wind turbines and electric cars built in Europe or Asia. I want them built here in the United States of America by American workers. Instead of cutting education and student aid, we want to make our new college tax credit permanent. $10,000 in tuition relief for every young person who goes to college. We're going to fight to keep the reforms we made to the student loan system because thanks to those reforms, tens of billions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies that be going to banks right now are going to students. That's where they belong. If the other side wins, they'll try their hardest to give rein back to the insurance companies and the credit card companies and the Wall Street banks that we're finally holding accountable. We can't let them do that. We can't go back to the days of taxpayer-funded bailouts. We can't go back to the day when credit card companies could just jack up your rates without any reason, or insurance companies could deny or drop your coverage just because you get sick. We need to keep that new law in place that says if you're looking for a job or have a job that doesn't offer you coverage and you're a young person, you can stay on your parents' insurance until you're 26 years old and that they can't drop your coverage just because you get sick. That's the choice in this election, Philadelphia. That's what's at stake right now. So, Philly, it comes down to this. Many of the Republicans who are running right now, these are the exact same folks who spent the last decade driving our economy into a ditch. And once we were elected, Joe and I, we put on our boots, we went down into that ditch. It was muddy and dusty down there, and it was hot. And we started pushing on that car to get it out of the ditch. And we had a whole bunch of folks like Joe Sestak helping us push that car out of the ditch. And every once in a while, we'd look up at the Republicans. They had driven it in the ditch, but they'd gotten out and they were kind of taking a break, fanning themselves and sipping on a Slurpee, watching us do all the work. And every once in a while, they'd say, "Why don't you push harder? You're not pushing the right way, Obama." But they didn't help. And after pushing and pushing over these last 20 months, finally, we've got that car out of the ditch. Now, the car's a little dented up. Fender's a little busted. It needs a tune-up. But it's moving. It's pointing in the right direction. We're on level ground now. We're starting to make repairs. And suddenly we get a tap on our shoulder and we look back, and who is it? It's the Republicans. And they say, what are they saying? They say, we want the keys back. Philadelphia, they can't have the keys back. They don't know how to drive. They don't know how to drive. They can ride with us if they want, but they got to get in the back seat. Because we want to go forward. We don't want the special interest riding shotgun. We want working families, middle class. They're our priority. I just want everybody to notice, when you get in your car and you want to go forward, what do? You put the car in D. If you're going backwards, what do? You put the car in R. That's not a coincidence. You want to ride forward, put it in D on November 2nd. But listen. Can I just say, at the end of the day, Philly, whether the Republicans get the keys back or not, it's going to depend on you. There's no question the other side sees a chance to get back in the driver's seat. And thanks to a Supreme Court decision called Citizens United, they're being helped along this year by special interest groups that are spending unlimited amounts of money on attack ads, on attacking folks like Patrick Murphy, attacking folks like Joe says, just attacking people without ever disclosing who's behind all these attack ads. You don't know. It could be the oil industry, it could be the insurance industry, could even be foreign-owned corporations. You don't know because they don't have to disclose. Now, that's not just a threat to Democrats, that's a threat to our democracy. Every American business and industry deserves a seat at the table, but they don't get a chance to buy every chair. We've seen what happens when they do. They put the entire economy at risk, and every American might end up suffering. So you can't let it happen. Don't let them hijack your agenda. The American people deserve to know who's trying to sway their elections. And you can't stand by and let special interests drown out the voices of the American people. So Philadelphia, that's why I need you working even harder in this election than you did in the last election. We need you to fight their millions of dollars with our millions of voices. I look out on this crowd and I see millions of voices all across the country. We've got to finish what we started in 2008. Because if everybody who fought so hard for change in 2008 shows up to vote in 2010, I'm absolutely confident we will win. And most of the polls say the same thing. See, what the other side is counting on, what they're counting on is you're going to stay home. They're counting on your silence. They're counting on your amnesia. They're counting on your apathy. They're counting on young people staying home, and union members staying home, and black folks staying home, and middle-class families staying home. They're counting on the fact that they made the argument so ugly in Washington that you're just completely turned off, and you're not going to vote for anybody. And if that happens, they win. Philly, let's prove them wrong. Let's show Washington one more time, change doesn't come from the top. It comes from the bottom. It doesn't come from millions of dollars of ads. It comes because people are out there knocking on doors, making phone calls, going into the beauty shops, going into the barber shops. We have come, I know we're a long way from the day of the hope and excitement we all felt on election night. We're far from Inauguration Day. But I always told you it was going to take time. I always told you it was going to be hard. Because change has always been hard. But from the first days of our nation, every time Americans have tried to bring about real meaningful change, we face down setbacks. We face down disappointments. We have faced fear, and we have faced down doubt. As Americans, we've always moved forward. We've always kept fighting. We've always remembered that in the United States of America, our destiny is not written for us. It is written by us. That's how we came through war. That's how we came through depression. That's how we got civil rights legislation. That's how we got workers' rights. That's how we got women's rights. It's being tested right now. But if you keep moving forward in the face of difficulty, I promise you, we will not lose this election. We will win this election. And we will make sure